Spain stumbled upon the biggest fortune in all of human history and still ended up broke. Endless mountains of silver, unlimited rivers of gold, entire continents crushed under imperial rule. For one brief moment in the 1500s, Spain wasn't just powerful, it was absolutely unstoppable. If wealth was only about precious metals, the Spanish throne should have controlled the planet forever. But it didn't. This is where money, power, and history crash together, and nothing is ever as straightforward as it appears. This wasn't just some fight between two kingdoms, it was a massive economic experiment playing out on a global stage. Spain and England didn't just clash in naval warfare, they competed over something far deeper. What actually builds lasting wealth? Is it treasure or is it systems? Is it resources or is it institutions? Is it extraction or is it engineering? And the answer completely reshaped the modern financial world. In 1492, when Christopher Columbus sailed westward under Spanish command, Europe had absolutely no clue it was about to trigger the biggest transfer of precious metals in human history. Within just a few decades, Spain conquered enormous territories throughout the Americas. In 1521, Hernán Cortés obliterated the Aztec Empire. In 1533, Francisco Pizarro destroyed the Inca. The loot was absolutely staggering. Then came Potosi. High up in what's now Bolivia, Spanish forces uncovered what might have been the richest silver mine ever discovered. The mountain, Cerro Rico, pumped out an estimated 16,000 tons of silver between the mid-1500s and mid-1600s, along with roughly 180 tons of gold shipped from the Americas. This tsunami of precious metal turned Spain into Europe's financial hub. By 1600, Spain commanded a global empire stretching from the Philippines to Peru, from Naples to the Netherlands. Its navy ruled the Atlantic. Its armies, the feared tercios, were thought to be nearly unbeatable. But here's where the first crack appears in the fantasy. Wealth flooded in faster than Spain could handle it. Silver poured into Seville. Prices started climbing and climbing and climbing some more. Prices across Spain and much of Europe roughly quadrupled, a phenomenon economists now call the price revolution. What looked like national prosperity was actually early modern inflation. The money supply exploded dramatically as bullion flooded the economy. But domestic production couldn't keep up. More money chasing the same products. Inflation isn't some modern creation, it's a mathematical inevitability. Spain possessed more silver than anyone, but that silver destroyed its own value. Meanwhile, something more subtle was unfolding. Spain became hooked on imports. Rather than pouring resources into domestic industry, it used American treasure to purchase manufactured products from the Netherlands, Italy, and eventually England. Textiles, tools, ships Spain paid others to manufacture what it could have produced itself. Silver flowed in. Finished goods flowed out. If that pattern sounds familiar, it should. Resource-rich countries often confuse inflow with strength. When revenue feels automatic, discipline disappears. Why industrialize aggressively when the mines keep producing? But silver is not productivity, it's liquidity. And liquidity without structure evaporates. The Spanish crown, under rulers like Philip II, financed massive military campaigns across Europe, wars in the Netherlands. The empire's size demanded constant spending. Armies needed salaries. Fleets needed upkeep, fortresses needed strengthening. So Spain borrowed, heavily. German banking families like the Fuggers and Genoese financiers extended credit to the Spanish monarchy, using expected silver shipments as collateral. On paper, this looked logical. After all, the mines were still operating. But empires don't function on paper. When silver fleets got delayed by storms or piracy, cash flow strangled. When military costs exceeded projections, which they constantly did, deficits exploded. Then came the defaults. Spain declared sovereign bankruptcy in 1557, then again in 1575, and again in 1596, and in 1607, the wealthiest empire on earth repeatedly failed to honor its obligations. If there were an Olympic medal for financial denial, policymakers would still be standing on the podium. But this wasn't just incompetence, it was structural weakness. Spain's political system concentrated power in the monarchy. Taxation was uneven and often inefficient. Regional privileges fragmented revenue collection. Nobility blocked reforms. Economic modernization fell behind military ambition. The empire was enormous, but the financial infrastructure was brittle. Now look north. In the 16th century, England was not impressive. It lacked Spain's colonial magnitude. It lacked massive bullion inflows. It lacked the atmosphere of inevitability. England was smaller, poorer, and politically unstable. Its navy was developing, but it wasn't yet dominant. And yet something was forming beneath the surface. In 1588, the Spanish Armada sailed toward England, planning to crush it. The fleet was enormous, over 130 ships. Spain anticipated a decisive victory. Instead, storms, logistical disasters, and English naval tactics destroyed the Armada. Over the next century, England faced internal chaos. Civil war erupted in the 1640s. King Charles I was executed in 1649. Monarchy was abolished, then restored. Political instability could have permanently crippled the country. Instead, it forced a complete redesign. In 1688, the Glorious Revolution permanently transferred power from absolute monarchy toward parliament. This was not just a constitutional moment, it was a financial revolution. Because control over taxation and borrowing shifted away from one unpredictable ruler and into a more institutional framework, investors took notice. In 1694, the Bank of England was established. This wasn't some ceremonial institution, it was engineered to manage government debt efficiently and to stabilize credit. The government could now issue long-term bonds backed by parliamentary taxation authority. That single transformation changed the geometry of power. Spain borrowed against silver shipments. England borrowed against institutional credibility, and credibility compounds. During the 18th century, Britain accumulated staggering levels of public debt, especially during wars against France. By the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, British public debt exceeded 200% of GDP. That number should sound terrifying. But here's the difference. Investors trusted the system. British bonds traded actively. The state honored its commitments, taxation was predictable. Financial markets were deep and increasingly sophisticated. Debt in this framework wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a tool. Spain had mountains of metal and fragile credit. Britain had limited metal and powerful credit. Which is more valuable? Credit markets allowed Britain to finance wars consistently. It didn't depend on a single shipment arriving safely from across the ocean. It depended on confidence. And confidence can mobilize more capital than any mine. By the mid-1700s, British financial institutions had evolved into a network capable of funding not just war but enterprise. Insurance markets expanded. Joint stock companies multiplied. The East India Company became both a commercial and political force. Trade routes multiplied. Manufacturing intensified. Then came steam. The Industrial Revolution didn't explode in Spain. It exploded in Britain. And that wasn't some accident of geography, it was an outcome of incentives. Britain's financial system encouraged reinvestment, experimentation, and capital formation. Entrepreneurs could raise funds. Investors could diversify risk. Profits could be recycled into infrastructure. Systems beat silver. Meanwhile, Spain's empire was collapsing. Colonial revolts emerged. Administrative inefficiencies deepened. Economic dependency hardened. The very wealth that had made Spain dominant in the 1500s became a cushion that delayed reform. Abundance, unmanaged, breeds complacency, and complacency is expensive. By the early 19th century, Spain's global dominance had vanished. Britain controlled trade routes. London became the financial capital of the world. The pound sterling functioned as a global reserve currency long before the dollar existed. And here's where the story gets uncomfortable, especially for modern audiences who assume the financial world began in London or New York. Britain inherited trade networks Spain opened. It learned from Dutch banking innovations. It adapted and institutionalized what others pioneered. History isn't a straight Anglo ascent, it's layered. The economic battle between Spain and England wasn't decided by cannons alone. It was decided by how each empire defined wealth. Spain believed treasure equaled power. England believed trust equaled power. One model was extractive, the other was systemic. And that difference still echoes today. The story didn't end when Britain rose and Spain declined. Because what Spain and England were really competing over wasn't territory, it was a theory of wealth. And that theory still governs the modern financial system. Spain believed wealth was something you discovered. England believed wealth was something you constructed. That distinction sounds philosophical. It's not, it's mechanical. Look at the modern world. In the 20th century, vast oil reserves were discovered across the Middle East, Russia, Venezuela, and parts of Africa. Entire nations were suddenly sitting on rivers of energy, the modern equivalent of silver from Potosi. Revenues surged, budgets expanded, consumption exploded. But here's the uncomfortable pattern. Countries rich in natural resources often struggle with currency instability, inflation, corruption, and sovereign debt crises. Economists call it the resource curse. But it's not a curse, it's structural temptation. When wealth arrives easily, reform feels unnecessary. If you can fund the state through oil royalties, why build a broad tax base? If the mines pay the bills, why industrialize aggressively? If commodity prices are high, why worry about productivity? Meanwhile, countries without abundant natural resources, like Japan after World War II or South Korea, in the 1960s were forced to build systems, export industries, manufacturing bases, educational infrastructure, financial discipline, constraints force structure, abundance often erodes it. Now bring this closer to home. The United States did not become the dominant financial power of the 20th century because of gold reserves alone. Yes, after World War II, the U.S. held the majority of global gold reserves under the Bretton Woods system. But gold didn't sustain the dollar's dominance after 1971, when President Nixon severed the dollar's convertibility to gold. What sustained it? Trust. U.S. Treasury markets became the deepest, most liquid sovereign debt markets in history. The Federal Reserve functioned as lender of last resort. Legal institutions, imperfect but comparatively stable, supported contracts and capital flows. The dollar is powerful not because it shines, it's powerful because markets trust it. That trust allows the U.S. government to finance deficits at scale. It allows corporations to borrow globally. It allows the American financial system to absorb shocks that would shatter less institutionalized economies. Sound familiar? That's the England model. Debt levels in the United States have risen dramatically over the past decades. Public debt now exceeds 100% of GDP. In isolation, that number looks dangerous. Spain defaulted repeatedly at far lower ratios. But ratios don't tell the full story. What matters is whether investors believe the system can service the debt without destroying its currency or undermining growth. As long as treasury markets remain liquid and credible, debt becomes an instrument rather than a weakness. That's the distinction Spain never mastered. Spain borrowed against future silver shipments. When shipments faltered, the illusion cracked. Britain and later the U.S. borrow against future tax capacity and economic output inside a structured institutional framework. Silver runs out. Trust scales. But trust is not automatic. If political instability undermines fiscal discipline, if inflation becomes persistent, if central bank credibility weakens, if debt grows faster than productive capacity, even the strongest financial anchor begins to drift. This isn't alarmism, it's structural logic. Spain didn't collapse the moment inflation began. It decayed slowly, repeated defaults raised borrowing costs. Dependency deepened, institutional reform lagged behind geopolitical ambition. From the outside, Spain still looked dominant for decades. Financial erosion rarely announces itself loudly. And here is the uncomfortable symmetry. Every dominant financial system eventually faces the temptation Spain faced to rely on status instead of discipline. The U.S. today benefits from network effects. The dollar is embedded in global trade, energy markets, derivatives, and sovereign reserves. Replacing it would be enormously costly for the world. That creates inertia. But inertia is not immunity. The lesson isn't, America will become Spain. The lesson is simpler. Credibility is the real asset. Britain understood this after the Glorious Revolution. Parliamentary control over taxation gave creditors confidence. The Bank of England created structure. Bond markets disciplined government through pricing mechanisms. The United States inherited and expanded that framework. Its capital markets became the center of gravity for global finance. But frameworks require maintenance. When fiscal deficits widen structurally rather than cyclically, when monetary policy stretches to accommodate political pressure, when institutional independence erodes, the England model begins to resemble the Spain model. Not immediately. Gradually. The difference between extractive wealth and engineered wealth still matters. Now bring this down from the macro level to the individual. Individuals make the same mistake during economic bubbles. Asset prices rise, housing, equities, crypto. Balance sheets expand. Leverage feels manageable because valuations are climbing, liquidity masks fragility, then conditions change. When income is tied to appreciation rather than productivity, downturns expose the weakness. That's the modern version of a delayed silver fleet. Financial freedom isn't about catching the right boom, it's about building systems that survive cycles. Diversified cash flow, disciplined reinvestment, controlled leverage, institutional awareness. The global financial system is not held together by gold bars and vaults. It is held together by belief in enforcement, repayment, and continuity. Spain had vaults full of metal. Britain built vaults full of contracts. The United States today anchors a system of contracts, treasury securities, dollar clearing networks, global payment rails. That's real power. But power built on contracts requires trust and enforcement, and trust requires restraint. The economic battle between Spain and England wasn't about nationalism, it was about financial design. Britain distributed power across parliament, creditors, and markets. One model was politically concentrated and economically volatile. The other was politically constrained and financially scalable. The difference changed the trajectory of global power for centuries. The modern world still runs on that template. Countries rich in commodities but weak in institutions struggle with inflation and currency crises. Countries strong in institutions but modest in resources often dominate capital flows. The question is never who has the most treasure, it's who has the most credible system. That's the sting in this story. Spain won the gold. England won the architecture. And architecture outlasts treasure. History doesn't punish nations for being wealthy, it punishes them for misunderstanding what wealth actually is. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.